But where are you really from?
A podcast about the Asian American struggle.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Lynn.
And I'm Jesse Lynn, and welcome back to But Where Are You Really From?
Today we're talking about an age-old Asian thing, which is, I don't know how to, pillar of Asian identity. Like, I don't really know how best to describe it, but basically the concept of saving face. I feel like this is something that's very foundational to certainly like Chinese, Taiwanese culture, but I do think there is a trickling down or like influence on the other Asian cultures as well. To be fair, like, of course, as always, we don't know tech shit, but I'm just postulating that because the Chinese Empire was so huge and so long lasting forever, and we know that China had a big influence on all of the other Asian countries just by the fact that like a lot of them still use Chinese characters in their language. I'm just postulating that something like saving face maybe originated in China, or like in Chinese culture, and like kind of became more pervasive. So maybe that's why it's, I think it's across all the Asian cultures, not just Chinese. But we wanted to discuss it today in terms of like what it means to us, the impact that it's had on us, the difficulty with kind of explaining it or reconciling with it within a Western context, and where we think its place is kind of in our lives and our future like families' lives, if at all. So Jesse, how would you define the concept of saving face?
So first of all, I want to agree with you that I think it is across multiple Asian ethnicities, across the whole entire Asian diaspora. And I think what you're saying is actually pretty correct. I personally feel like the whole idea of Confucianism as a religion, it did spread pretty far. And within that, there are a lot of those tenets of like respect for your parents and like respect for your family and like upholding the family virtue. And that obviously spread past China to other countries. So I can definitely see like where that kind of takes root. What does saving face mean to me? I mean, it's such a difficult thing to explain because, where you start is usually telling people it's this kind of like embarrassment that you don't want to accrue on behalf of your family. It's not even like personal embarrassment because like it might be something where you personally don't care at all, like how it reflects on you, but rather it's like something that will reflect badly on your parents. For example, I'm gay. I don't care. I like being gay. But in the traditional sense of saving face, it would be something that I would be embarrassed about on behalf of my family because it's a status that leaves me unable to fulfill some of the duties that being an only single male child I should be able to fulfill, like procreating and having a family and all that stuff. So that kind of leaves like how else is defined. It's honestly it's hard to say because it's kind of enforced by your parents and your environment. So it's kind of like when you're a kid and you learn like not to touch hot things, not to touch sharp things. You kind of get all those cues from people in your family and your environment with like, oh no, that's bad, or this is embarrassing. Like, how could you do this to me? And eventually you build this kind of idea of like, we don't want to do these particular things because it could look bad about, on the family. Yeah. But it is pretty difficult to define like clear black and white lines, at least for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like it is so much like the learned definition through no-nos and things you've been shunned for in life for how you really understand it, because it is difficult to explain it with I think no singular, at least like English word can define what it really means. But I do like some of the terminology used. I think the idea of like how things reflect on your family, almost like it's a mirror, right? Like any action you do is like a mirror into your family, and like, so you need to constantly kind of like watch what you're doing to see what the impact of that action would be on your family in terms of if it will make them look good or look bad. And for me, I do think embarrassment is in there, but for me, I think it's even stronger. It's more shame. Like you're trying to avoid bringing shame to your family, and that I didn't even tie the Confucianism with it, but you make such a good point that I'm sure it's rooted in Confucianism, because the idea behind like bringing honor to your family is your kind of like highest thing you're trying to strive for as like an Asian person in general. Is just like you always want to bring honor to your family, your situation, yourself. And what's the opposite of honor? It's like shame, disgrace, like being outcast. So it's like anything you're doing that leans more into those negative words is not saving face. It's like losing face, right? And I actually, it's really funny. I think we talked about this, but I like how like visual the words are in Chinese, because in English we say saving face, which is like you're trying to protect it, but in Chinese you talk about like 丢脸, which is like to throw the face, like you're like casting away the honor, right? So like it's more spoken about in the negative term. It's not like you're trying to like save this thing and like protect this thing. It's like you're literally choosing to like throw it on the ground, my honor and like all this dignity. So you're always trying to like avoid being 丢脸. And it's always so like visual in my head. I'm like, oh wow, I'm like throwing something on the ground that you're trampling on or something.
Well, I will add to the list of emotions that you threw out there. I think disappointment's also a huge one. And for me, I've always struggled a little bit with this, because disappointment to me is, it sounds kind of weird, but it's a little bit more of a Western emotion. There's more emotion to it. There's more like negativity. There's more personal investment in it. And I definitely feel like some of the other things where you just have like disapproval or like disgrace, I don't know. Those are like, to me, it feels kind of like very black and white, but the disappointment is always the thing that was what I was chasing, and what I think did fuck me up for a little bit, trying to find a way to be myself, but not generate disappointment for my parents. And of course, we're talking about how the idea of saving face or 丢脸 is like, it's changing, because you get reinforced on what it is based off of other people's reactions. So there's always like uncertainty as to like which things will be received well, which things won't be received well.
Interesting. Well, I think a lot of what we've said, maybe we need to dig into a little bit more, which is that we keep talking about like, you know, the changing idea of it, that you're like, whether something is approved or disapproved is based on what others think. And I do think that is a really integral part of the idea of saving face, is that you're not in control of any of it. Like it's all dependent on how other people outside of you, outside of your family even, are going to perceive the thing that you've done. And I think that's why the idea of saving face is so Asian, is that like we've talked about this a lot, but Asian culture is so much more community oriented than American culture, for example, where it's very individualistic. So like America is literally about like degaff, right? Like I don't give a fuck, because you're just focused on you. You're like, you don't like me? Like I literally don't care. You know what I mean? Like that's the energy that America gives off, because it's like, I'm gonna be me, I'm gonna do me, right? Like that's the whole like ideology behind the US, versus in Asia, that's not how it is. You can't just be out for number one. Like you're part of something bigger. And so the idea that you would make decisions that are good for you but are going to have like negative consequences or negative reputational impact or whatever on those close to you or those in your community is unfathomable versus like you try to explain how like bad that is to someone in Western culture and they're just like, I don't get it, like why is this such a big deal, you know what I mean? It's so hard to reconcile with that because it's difficult to ever fully explain why it's so important to us.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the thing I was talking about is like how it reflects on other people in your community, like your choices. So generally I feel like, all parents everywhere care about how their children do, right? It's how you are as a parent. But to what you were saying, your point regarding the differences in how the choices of the child are attributed or not attributed to a parent, I feel like more so in Asian cultures, when you make a choice that's not, let's say, congruent to what the expectations are, the parent takes it more personally in the sense that they're like, oh, like, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong with raising you, or I didn't give you the right support or whatever, like that you turned out this way that falls from the expectation? Versus I think for more like westernized families in general, I think the parent will still have some kind of reaction. They'll be like, oh, like you're trying to be a rock star, like, that's kind of like, nah. But they're going to be like disappointed that you made that choice, not disappointed in themselves necessarily. And I'm sure, as I said, with each parent, there's probably a little bit of that, but it's definitely more pronounced, I think, in the Asian parents about really attributing the failures of their children to their own efforts.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I feel like it always goes back to the community versus individuality thing. But here in Western culture, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like, yes, you had some impact on maybe like the options that they had or like the leanings that they had with interests or whatever. But ultimately, Western parents assign more agency to their children and recognize that like people make their own individual choices regardless of like environment and upbringing and whatever, so they don't attribute it back to themselves fully. Versus Asian culture, it's I think it's two things. One is that because of the whole idea of like filial piety and like respecting parents, respecting elders, Asian parents are used to having a greater sense of authority over their children and shaping who they become in life because they're more used to being able to tell you exactly what the fuck you're going to do with your life. You know what I mean? Like there's less us pushing back. Obviously that's changing with like Western upbringings and whatnot, but like relatively speaking, an Asian kid in America versus like a white kid in America, Asian kid's still going to listen generally more to their parents than a white kid. And so there's like this level of control that they're used to. So then if they feel like I have complete control over my child and the way that they're brought up, then yeah, they are going to feel like completely responsible for the choices that you make, because they're like, how could this go this way? I felt like I had like a tight rein on this, you know what I mean? So I think that's part of it. And then the other part of it floated out of my brain already. Do you love ramen, Jesse?
Oh my God, yes.
Don't you hate the shitty instant ramen we have here in the States, though?
Totally and completely.
What if I could tell you that you could get premium instant ramen direct from Japan delivered straight to your door?
Did you know that in Japan, instant ramen is actually legit? They put a lot of care into using high quality ingredients for the soup, the noodles, and the toppings.
But how do I get access to that when I live here?
Well, bitch, you're in luck. We've teamed up with 5 a.m. Ramen, a business based out of Tokyo that is obsessed with all things ramen. They are offering premium curated sets of the best instant ramen in Japan to consumers worldwide.
And with our special discount code, you'll get 5% off your order and free shipping worldwide. Just use really from 5 at checkout.
Head over to instantramen.jp now and use our promo code REALLYFROM5.
Oishi! Now I'm remembering what I lost from my brain earlier, which is the other part of why Asian parents it's so deeply personal for them about like the choices that kids make and whatever, is that because we have this idea of legacy in Asian culture, like, you know, you come from a long bloodline of like, you can trace your family name back to like thousands of years ago, and there's been this like historical legacy tied to the Lin family or whatever, right? And so you're part of something bigger, and when you do something that is disgraceful, it is bad on that legacy and then bad on them, because the way they see children is like how they're passing on their legacy. Like you are the embodiment of their hopes and dreams for like what they could not accomplish in their life. They're passing on to the next iteration of them, which is the next like step in the legacy. So if they are banking on you to fulfill everything they never got to do in their lifetime, and then you choose not to do the things they wanted to do, then they're like, what the hell, you know? Like, so there's so much pent up, like, just like aspiration and hope that they've placed on you that I don't know that Western parents place as much. Like, of course, every parent has like hopes and dreams of like what their kids will end up doing, but because they recognize more that people are individuals who make their own choices, they're not like, hey, kid's gonna turn out how they're gonna turn out, versus like Asian parents are like, no, I have this dream for you, you're gonna do it.
Sometimes I wonder if it's just an immigrant thing, you know, like when you're coming from, you know, we've talked about in the past, like how just wildly different our parents' lives were compared to their lives now. And so sometimes I wonder if that's just the gap that we always have to, that any immigrant has to bridge, because you're always coming here with this like dream of fulfilling, you know, more than you had.
I think that's fair, but I think it still exists, because all you have to do is watch any like Asian drama to know that it still exists in Asia. Because if it's not about immigration, then it's about moving up in socioeconomic, you know, the socioeconomic ladder. So like, you know, I had a food stall my whole life and was able to like support our family through this business, but I didn't get to finish college, so I need my kids to finish college and like have a white collar job. Or even if you're rich, like, I mean, Crazy Rich Asians is not real life, but like they tapped on some legit element of Asian or Chinese culture, which is like, especially rich people, their most important thing is maintaining their legacy. So if they've already hit peak, they can't fall down from peak. So they need to make sure that their kids, like, they need their kids to like take on what they've built, right? So like if it's like they're the CEO of a multi-billion dollar empire or whatever, and their kid is like, I don't want to take on the family business, then it's like, no, you're not gonna reject this, you know. And like who you're gonna marry better be as good as like our socioeconomic class, because if not, you're also gonna bring shame to us. So I think it exists everywhere in the Asian diaspora, including in Asia, but to different degrees. And I definitely agree with you that like the immigrants will always have like a very deep hopes and dreams, because they made such a big sacrifice to change up their lives to come here. I think it exists in all different degrees everywhere though. And so going back to like things that would also cause you to lose face, straying from the default, right? So like if you decided you didn't want to have kids at all, that's fucking bad, because again, legacy, it's all about passing down the bloodline.
Divorce is also very bad.
Yes, which we talked about with Shivani, and that certainly spans into South Asian culture. Yes, divorce.
Not dating in the race.
Girl, yes. I mean, that one, I had so much like pent up anxiety about introducing my parents to Ramon in the beginning, because I was like, even if he's the most fantastic person out there, will you still feel ashamed just because he's not Chinese? It's like everything that is a significant life choice, I would say. So career, relationship, family, like all these big things, because those are the most important in their minds and also the most likely to be bragged about or gossiped about, because that's the opposite, right? If you're not able to brag about it, people are probably gossiping about you, which is like brings even more shame to you because you're being talked about negatively.
Yeah. And honestly, like sometimes I think about it and I'm like, really the part that's missing, if there was communication about the expectations, I think it would have been a lot easier to navigate it. But because it's always like unspoken, like what is desired, you're always like, what exactly is it that you want? There's no basis by which you can have a conversation about what those expectation looks like, because they're always like,
Well, I don't know. I think some of those are communicated. Like I was explicitly told career-wise, like you better go into something that's going to like make a bunch of money. And by that I mean like two things: doctor, lawyer, businessman. Like that's kind of like it. And then marriage, like we talked about in the interracial episode, it was literally like from when boys weren't icky to me, they're like, you better marry a Chinese speaking person. And then, well, let's go into this because I think it's naturally flowing that way. But for me, the other one was when my brother came out as gay. They were like, okay, well, now you need to have kids because you're our only hope to pass down the like Lin family bloodline. So let's get into that, because you brought up, you know, you're coming out as certainly a topic related to saving face. What was that experience like? Not just coming out in general, but like, how did it relate to your concept of saving face that you were brought up on? And like, did it affect certain decisions that you made in terms of like how you would tell, when you would tell, all that stuff?
I mean, it really did, because when I was thinking about telling my parents, really only my mom knows at this point in time, but I was thinking about telling them, I wasn't necessarily thinking about just how they would feel about it, but rather what kind of pressure they would be under from their family and their community. And it's not even necessarily that I'm thinking about like the pressure that they would put on my parents if they knew, but rather the pressure of keeping that secret from other people. And so even just the thought about thinking about coming out, you have to think about this wider group of people that your parents are entangled with, and whether or not holding that secret will make them miserable, basically. So it's not just about their personal individual orientation towards how they would react on that news, but how they can manage that in themselves. And that's why for a long time I didn't tell any of either of my parents, because I was like, I don't really need the support. Like, I'm comfortable with who I am, where I am, what I'm doing. And so what I was really waiting for was a moment where I felt like they were telling me that they were comfortable taking on this information, knowing that they have to manage it for this entire kind of community. And in fact, like, I think it was really hard for my mom, because she was like, oh, like, you know, she was telling me how she didn't want me to tell my dad, and she had to like manage. She was like, I want to like try to figure out how to do this. And then for a long time, I don't think she told anyone else either, until recently we had another conversation. I was like, feel free to tell whoever you want. Like, I don't care. But if it will make you feel better about it to have someone to talk to, like, that's what I really wanted for her, and not for her to feel so isolated from the community because I am gay.
Wow, that's interesting, because it's similar, but you focus on a different aspect of saving face for your parents than I think my brother did when he came out. Well, first of all, I don't think I gave him the choice. So we didn't talk about this on the episode that he joined, and he was nicer about framing it, where he said like, Angela helped me with coming out. But the reality is that I was like 12 at the time, and I didn't understand why being gay was a big deal, and I essentially blabbed to my parents. I was like, well, no, I didn't say it outright, but I was like hinting at it, and then I was like, don't you get it? And essentially I outed him, and very innocently, frankly, because as a child, it literally was like, I didn't see what the big deal was, and as a kid I was just like, how could you have not told them yet? Like, this is so important, and like, it's just who you are. Like, let's just share it. And so that's how he came out. And So there was no choice for my parents to like choose or not choose to hold this. So then it was really about mitigating the ripple effect onto everyone else. And I do remember the conversation that my mom had where she was just like, you could tell she was like desperately trying to like figure out how to contain this like shame slash poison, I guess, that she was seeing it as at the time, which is she was just like, well, we can't tell anyone in the family, like this has to stay here, we're not going to tell any of your aunts and uncles or cousins, and like I will die if my mom finds out, like, you know, essentially. And at the time it was so drastic that she was like, I'm disowning you, like this is so shameful that I'm disowning you, you're not part of this family anymore. And of course this is very like, you know, impulse driven and like first reaction type stuff because of all the shame that she had been brought up on around the idea of homosexuality. So obviously that's not how she thinks now, and they're fine. My brother still lives with them, so they're not disowned. But it really was like such an immediate like trickling out into so many layers of our like extended family, like how do I contain this? And when she was like, you know, more used to the idea, and like, not to say that I don't think they are ever going to be like, I love the idea that you're gay, but they've accepted it to this, you know, at this point. And so sometimes my brother will kind of like stoke the fire and he'll be like, so can I tell like XYZ family member now? And she'd be like, no, you know, she's just like, absolutely not. And he's like, why not? It's not a big deal. Like, who cares anymore? Because it's, you know, he's lived here long enough where he's like, you know, it doesn't matter to me. And like, certainly everyone else in his life knows outside of like our extended family. So he's like, it's not for me. It's clearly for you. And like, I think what he grapples with is like, he feels restricted because he's like, I don't feel like I get to live my full like free self because you're telling me that I can't like tell these people in our family because of the shame that you feel, because he doesn't feel any shame or disgrace from it. So it's interesting because it's the same topic and it's the same like fears, but it's from like a different angle, I think. Okay, so for all the strife and the, you know, agony that this idea of saving face and maintaining the, you know, honor for your family has brought you and me and all Asian people in our lives, do you think there is any merit or benefit to maintaining this kind of concept in your current life, your future life, and like, you know, if you just have kids or whatever, and people you have influence over in the future, do you think it's worthwhile?
What I think we should take out of the idea of saving face is that there's definitely some kind of kindness, a courtesy to it that I think is worth preserving. And where I think we can make it better is to really explain why that is important, right? Like, as we were talking about earlier, it's so hard to say why it is important. I think that's part of the reason why it's such a headache for both of us, and probably for a lot of other Asian Americans, is that there's a place that it comes from where it's, you know, consideration and care about this person, about your community. And where it can get better is to really just help each individual community member, person in your family, your child, whatever, understand why it is so important, so that they have a better appreciation of like what you're pushing for. Of course, I will caveat that with that I'm never going to put, if I ever do have a child, I'm never going to push them to do a thing that I want, but I will explain to them like, hey, I think you should do this thing. I think it's important because of this. It has this personal significance for me. Do with that what you will, but you know, I've given you all the information about it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I think a dog is dying in your background. There's like really horrific dog barking.
Sorry, there always is. There's a few pups in the building.
Hey everyone, we love doing this podcast, and if you enjoy our episodes, we would really appreciate if you could support us in any number of ways. First is by subscribing to us, rating us, and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Second is by telling a friend. Third is following us on Instagram at whereareyoufrompod. Fourth is supporting us on Buy Me a Coffee. You can find out more about all of these by visiting our Instagram's link in bio. And again, our handle is at whereareyoufrompod. Thank you.
What about you?
I agree with you completely. I think, well, first, what I'll latch on to strongly is that I completely agree that the part that's worth saving is the compassionate part, where you are being considerate of other people and thinking about how your consequences impact other people. I think that's just compassion and empathy, and that's very important to me and something that I think is worthwhile passing on even outside of this concept, but it's so tied to why this concept is important. What I think we can do away with is the root of where this comes from, which is shame and disgrace, right? Those ideas, those super negative ideas, because I think what drives people to preserve face, save face, is the desire to avoid shame. It's a fear of succumbing to this like super negative thing, and so you're desperately trying to run away from this negative thing, so you're going to be good to avoid the negative consequence, as opposed to just being good because you know you're doing good for other people. So I think if I were to pass on this concept, it would not be framed the same way. It would be framed in terms of like, hey, why don't we think about like when we make choices and when we perform actions in life, think outside yourself. I think that's the kind of big takeaway, is like you can still make your own choices and like you weigh the pros, cons, and like the impacts and whatever, and still you can still choose to do stuff that might have some negative impact on other people, sure, but like at least you thought about it, right? Versus like I think in America there is maybe a too extreme worlds where like there's so much YOLO and like decaf, like, you know, just out for yourself, that there isn't enough emphasis on other people. Well, first of all, just to be transparent, we fucked up, and our fortune cookie closing section was supposed to be about if this was something that we wanted to pass on, but we kind of rolled it into the merits and benefits. Oopsies. So I think another topic that we thought about potentially discussing to close this off is if a decision that we've made in the past that was tied to wanting to save face actually turned out good for us. And Jesse was just mentioning to me off the record that it's difficult because a lot of our decisions in life are tied to saving face because it's constantly in the back of our heads. But I'm just thinking back to kind of like big decisions in my life, I guess. And for me, I think one of the ones that did have a strong lasting impact is when I was 15, right? I was like, I saw my first band and I was like, I want to work in music. Like, I want to work in the music industry. And if I were Asian and like, and was thinking about like how I could still salvage this passion that I wanted to go after with something that could be packaged up in a nice, like Asian approved package, I don't think I would have gone to business school, because the way that I had to justify going into a career in music was that I would get a business degree and then like intern at record labels and stuff so that I could pursue what I wanted, but I could justify that with like, well, she went to NYU Stern, like, so it's fine. So then I wasn't bringing as much disgrace on my family because my mom could always say like, well, she's going to like one of the best business schools in America. Like she can latch on to the part that sounds good to her. But I could do the thing I wanted. And so it was good for that because I didn't bring shame to her right away, but also for me, because realistically, like, I don't know, if I was just like, I want to go into music and I was just like, I'm just going to like, I don't know, tailgate concerts and like try to like squeeze my way in there without like getting a degree, I don't know if I'd be where I am now, because obviously like I don't currently work in music. It's the idea of working in entertainment still part of my life, but it's not like music industry is not my thing. So maybe if I didn't have the business degree, I wouldn't have been able to pivot later into other things, because if my entire skill set was like related to the music industry and like hands-on experience and I never got that education, I probably couldn't transition into other things as easily.
That's a good one.
Yeah. How about you?
I think, I played piano for a lot of my life. I really want to get back into it. I feel like it really made me smart. And now when I look at a piano, I'm like, holy crap, I'm so stupid. Like, I can feel my brain trying to be like C, D, E, F, G, like, but yeah, I think a lot of the pressure and the not wanting to encounter the shame actually helped me develop good habits. I think my parents really trying to push me to excel here, and packing on the little bit of disappointment when they were like, you go to a recital and you're like in the middle of the thing and you're like, I don't remember how to play the rest of it. That really helped like kick me into trying to practice more and like really just be more into it, because I was already doing it. And so I definitely do, from that perspective, feel like it helped me develop musically in a way that I probably would not have by myself because I'm lazy.
And you said, though, that you think that's translated into, in general, how you approach adopting good habits?
In general, in adopting good habits, I feel like yes, because now I know that I have to force myself to stick to something. The interest is not enough. The interest is not enough. And this seems like pretty obvious to most people, but for me, I've always been like, oh, if I'm interested enough in it, I'll do it. Not true. It needs to be interest in like 2 weeks of consistent like grinding my face to the thing. And then I'm like, all right, I'm here. I'm here for it.
Well, there you have it. There is some good to being influenced by the idea of saving face. So if you listeners have your own experience about how the foundational concept of saving face has impacted your life for good or for better or for worse, write us in, because I think we're really interested to hear how this idea has kind of trickled into other people's lives. And as you know, we're always soliciting listener submitted stories for our reflections episodes. So do write us in at telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com. The your is YOURE. We are very eager to read your stories.
And we'll have a fresh new episode for you next week. And until then,
再见 bitches.